The styling for our project is pretty much now in place. There's just a little to come back to later on when we add this section down at the very bottom. But for now though, we're going to move on to add in our script file to introduce some JavaScript. And in particular, in this video, we'll capture the user's input and then update our last 7 days. So the first thing we need to do inside of our project is to create a new file, which is going to be the script.js. The first thing to do is to link this down at the very bottom, just above our close and body section. We can link this with the script element. This is also in the root of our project alongside our index, so we can just reference this with script.js. So let's take a quick moment to think about exactly what we want to do here. We have a form input just here where the user will add a value. So we want to listen out for any form submissions. Once this happens, we then want to run a function. So let's start with this over in the script.js. The first thing to do is to grab a reference to our form. So for this form section, we now need to listen out for the submit event. The submit event will be called each time the user hits enter inside this input or clicks on our submit button. So in the script, let's create a reference to this form. So const form. So our form reference is always going to stay the same. So this can be used as a constant. We then target the full document, and then we can use the query selector. Query selector is a way to capture HTML elements, and we can capture any of the elements in our HTML. The way we do this is exactly the same as our style sheet. If we target in an element, we reference the element by the name. If it's a class, we use the dot followed by the class name. And if it was a ID, we would use the hash prefix. Since our form is just simply a form element, we can target this. And then we want to add an event listener. The event in which we want to listen for is the submit event. And then we want to run a function. We add the name of our function as the second value separated by a comma. And the function name is going to be handle submit. We haven't created this handle submit function just yet. So just above our event listener, we can create this now. Handle submit is going to take in the event information, which is passed to the function each time the form has been submit. The first thing we're going to do is to grab this event information and then call prevent default. Prevent default will prevent the default behavior of the form submission, which is to reload the browser. For this use case, we don't want to refresh the browser since all of our information will be lost. Instead, what we want to do is to actually capture the user input from this field here. So again, let's use query selector, and this is going to grab our form input. So we could either grab this using the input name or also by the ID of entry. So document.querySelector. Just like with CSS, we target this with the hash and then the ID name. We can then grab the value and also store this inside of a variable or a constant. If you remember from earlier when we created the tip calculator, one of the problems which we had when we grabbed the information submitted by the user was the value came in the form of string. Since we work with numbers, we want to convert this to be a number type. So let's cut this. And we can convert this string value to be a number by passing this into the JavaScript number function. Before moving on, let's do a console log with the value of entry and check everything is working fine. Right click and inspect, and we can go into the console, click the console tab. Let's add some random numbers inside here. So 1.2, 6.4, meaning we're now successfully listening for a submit event and also capturing the user's input. There's also a couple of ways we can improve on this. If we go over to our input and type the value of 0, we'll still see that the value of 0 is still logged. This could cause a problem if a user was to hit enter by accident before inputting their value. Also, each time a value is added, we also want to clear this form so it's available for the next entry. Back over to our function, we can use an if statement to check if no entry has been made. So use the exclamation mark. And this means if no entry is present or the value is false. And then we can use the return keyword to break out our function since no value has been entered. The next thing to do is to clear the form input each time a value has been submitted. First of all, let's grab our form. So document.querySelector. We can grab our form, and then we can call the reset method, which is going to clear all of our form inputs. Enter a value. Now when we enter a value and hit enter, our form input is cleared. So with this taken care of, the next thing we want to do is to actually store all of the user values inside of an array. I'm going to initialize our array called entries and set this equal to an empty array. Notice here we use the let keyword rather than const because we want to update the values of entries. If this was set to be const, we wouldn't be able to update this array by pushing new values. Now the way to actually add a new value inside of our empty array is to first target this by the variable name of entries. And then an array has a push method which allows us to push a new value to the end of our array. The value which we want to push is our entry, which has been captured from our user input. Let's test this out with a console log. We can now put the value of entries, which is our array. Reload. Add a couple of values inside here and see what happens. This now updates our array with the user input. So with this all now working, let's remove our console log. And we could carry on adding more code to this handle submit method. But to keep this more clean, I'm going to create a new function, which is going to update our user interface. So each one of these array items is going to be pushed onto the end of our unordered list. So let's create a new function up at the very top. And I'm going to call this add new entry. And we're also going to call this function each time the user enters a new input, also passing in the value of entry. This entry value will then be received inside of our function, and I'm going to call this new entry, but the value will be exactly the same. First of all, let's do a console log with the value of new entry, just to check we are receiving this correctly in our function. Add a value. Okay, good. So now our function has access to each one of these user inputs. One of the great things about using JavaScript is we can also use it to create new elements in our DOM. So if we go to our index.html, so far we've been creating all of these elements inside of our HTML page, but we can also use JavaScript to create these too. The way we're going to use this in this function is we're going to target this unordered list, and then for each new number which the user adds, we're then going to create a new list item. The way to do this is by using document.createElement. When creating a new HTML element, we can use the same element name as the opening tag. So we can create a unordered list, a list item, a level 3 heading, or even a section. We're going to be using a list item, so we can push this to the end of our list. Let's store this inside of a constant called list item. And then next we also need a value to go in between our elements. At the moment, this is just going to create a list item, which is just like this, but we also need to create some text content inside. We do this in JavaScript with document.createTextNode. We can pass in anything such as a string of text, but in our case, we want to pass in the new entry. And then also store this in a constant too. I'm going to call this the list value. This now leaves us with the actual element and the contents, but these are two separate nodes. We need to actually add our list value to our list item. The way we can do this is by grabbing our list item, and then we use append child. This is going to add a new child node, and the new child node we want to add is the list value. So here, all we're basically doing is creating a list item with this first line. Then with the second line, we're creating a value from our new entry. So if the user enters 2.7, this will be stored in list value. We're then appending this list value into our list item. This is going to grab our value and place this inside of our element. This now leaves us with a fully constructed list item. This list item now needs to be pushed to our unordered list. And the way we can do this is by first targeting our unordered list by the ID of entries. Outside of our function, I'm going to create a constant, which is called our entries wrapper. And this is going to be equal to document.querySelector with the ID of entries. This is our unordered list, so now we need to push the list item, which we have here. The way we can do this is very similar to this line just here. We're going to grab our unordered list, again using append child, adding on our full list item. This will now take our list item and add this onto the very end of our unordered list, creating a new value at the end. Over to the browser and reload. We can add some values, 1.4. And these are all now added to the end of our list. This is all good. This now means our entries are now working and being pushed to our array. And we're also creating a new list item and updating the DOM. Just one little thing we need to do before we wrap this video up. These 3 new values which we just added will be added to the existing 7 entries. We only want to keep a record of the last 7 days. So each time we add a value to the end of the array, we also want to remove the first value too. So the way we do this in JavaScript is pretty much the opposite of what we've just done here. Here we're grabbing the unordered list and appending a new child element. Instead though, we want to do the opposite, which is to remove a child. So let's do this at the start of our add new entry function. Grab the entries wrapper, which is our unordered list. And then we can call remove child. If we just simply call remove child, JavaScript won't know exactly which child element we want to remove. By child element, we mean each one of these list items. But fortunately, JavaScript provides us with an easy and simple way to target the very first child element. And this is a property called first child element. Back over to our script. We can target the entries wrapper, which is all of our unordered list, and then select the first element child. Let's now save this file and go back over to the browser and check this is working. So let's add some values, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now for each element which we add, we see that we still have 7 days in total. Let's add number 8. And we see the value of 1 has now been removed from the start of our list. Let's try one more, the value of 9. And this removes the value of 2. So all of this may look pretty complex if it's something which you've not done before, but all we are doing is adding a new list item to the end here, and then removing the very first one. This is now a really important part of our running tracker application, now complete. And next we'll move down to our stats section where we'll add the total and also the average distance.